Welcome back to Chess Tactic Today. In this FIDE World Cup 2025 showdown, Jose Martinez Alcantara goes head-to-head against Velimir Ivic, and from the very start, it's tactics, tension, and total chaos. Martinez ignites the board with an early g-pawn thrust, turning a quiet setup into a calculated storm. Every move is sharper than the last, and just when you think it's over, both kings dive into danger. All right, Martinez Alcantara, playing as white, begins with knight to f3. This is a flexible modern opening, keeping options open and avoiding any early, sharp commitments. And Ivic, with the black pieces, immediately stakes a claim in the center with pawn to d5. A classic and solid response, setting up a strategic battle from the get-go. White follows up with pawn to g3. This signals the fianchetto plan. The bishop will soon come to g2, where it will exert pressure along the long diagonal. This is a very positional way to play. Black mirrors the idea with knight to f6, developing a piece and controlling the key central squares. Everything is calm and logical so far. Pawn to c4 from white. This move immediately challenges black's central d5 pawn. The game is taking the shape of a Reti Opening or a Catalan setup. The central tension begins. Black plays pawn to e6, a very solid choice. This reinforces the d5 pawn and prepares to develop the light-squared bishop. No fireworks yet, just building a solid foundation. As planned, white's bishop comes to g2. From here, it's like a sniper, controlling the longest diagonal on the board and keeping a watchful eye on black's queenside. Black develops the bishop to e7. A standard, reliable developing move that prepares for castling and keeps the position flexible. White castles kingside, getting the king to safety early on. This is almost always a top priority in the opening. And black does the same, castling kingside as well. Both kings are now tucked away and the middle game is about to begin, the calm before the storm. White plays the quiet pawn to d3. Instead of the more common d4, this move shows a patient approach, controlling the center without creating any immediate weaknesses. Black responds with pawn to c5, challenging white's control of the d4 square and creating a symmetrical, balanced pawn structure. Knight to f5, this is the first real sign of aggression from white. The knight lands on a beautiful outpost, putting pressure on black's position and asking some tricky questions. Black's queen moves to c7, immediately challenging that advanced knight. A very logical move that forces white to make a decision. And white responds with pawn to f4. This is a bold, ambitious move. White is committing to a stonewall-like setup, clamping down on the f5 square but also creating some potential long-term weaknesses around the king. Black develops the rook to date, placing it on the semi-open d-file and preparing to fight for central control. The pieces are starting to line up for a real fight. White develops the knight to c3, adding another piece to the battle and preparing to challenge black in the center. Pawn to a6 from black. This is a very useful prophylactic move, preventing any annoying jumps from white's knight to the b5 square. White initiates the first capture of the game. Pawn takes pawn on d5. This opens up the center and changes the pawn structure dramatically. Black recaptures with the e-pawn. This keeps the position relatively symmetrical, but now both sides have open files to work with. The pace is picking up. And pawn to f4, white is not backing down, immediately striking at the heart of black's position. This is a direct fight for the center. Black accepts the challenge, pawn takes pawn on f4. Now things are getting sharp. This is a critical moment where calculation becomes key. Whoa, pawn to g4, white isn't just fighting for the center, they're launching a full-blown kingside attack. This is incredibly ambitious and risky. It creates attacking chances but also exposes the white king. This move sets the tone for the rest of the game. Black develops the bishop to e6, calmly putting more pressure on the center and ignoring the flank attack for now, a very cool-headed response. And there's the follow-up pawn to g5. White continues the pawn storm, kicking the f6 knight and trying to tear open the lines around the black king. The real fireworks are about to begin. The knight retreats to d7. It's a safe square, and from there it helps defend and can potentially jump back into the action later. White decides to trade, knight takes the knight on d7. This simplifies the position slightly, but the tension remains sky-high. Black's queen recaptures on d7. The queen is now very active, eyeing both sides of the board. This signals a shift toward a more tactical phase. White's d-pawn takes on f4. This creates a passed pawn for white, but black's pieces are well coordinated to deal with it. And black immediately offers a queen trade with queen to d4 check. Would you trade queens here? It simplifies the game, but the resulting endgame is anything but simple. White accepts the trade, queen takes queen. We are now heading into an endgame, but it's an incredibly complex and dangerous one for both sides. Black recaptures with the c-pawn, and look at that. Black now has a passed d-pawn of their own. This pawn could become a game winner if not properly controlled. White's knight jumps to d5, a fantastic square. It blockades black's passed pawn, attacks the e7 bishop, and dominates the center. A powerful move. Black has to give up the bishop pair. Bishop takes the knight on d5. This is a major strategic decision, but it was necessary to eliminate that monster knight. White recaptures with the e-pawn, and now white has a passed d-pawn as well. We have a fascinating endgame with dueling passed pawns. It's a race to see whose pawn is stronger. Black develops the knight to d7, rerouting it to fight for control of the key central squares and to help blockade white's passed pawn. White develops the bishop to d12, connecting the rooks and preparing to challenge black's control of the c-file. Black plays pawn to a fiv, clamping down on the queen side and restricting white's pieces. A very good positional move. White's rook moves to cone, taking control of the semi-open c-file. White's plan is to put pressure on black's queen side. Black's bishop lands on c5. What a fantastic square. It blockades white's d-pawn and puts pressure on white's position. This bishop is a hero for black. Rook to e-on. White brings the last piece into the game, preparing to fight for the e-file and support the advance of the passed pawn. Black's king steps to fate. In the endgame, the king is a fighting piece. Black is bringing the king closer to the center to help in the struggle. And white does the same, king to phone. This is a classic endgame technique, improving the king's position before making any other moves. Pawn to b6 from black, shoring up the queen side and keeping white's pieces out. White plays pawn to a3, preparing to challenge black's queenside pawn structure. Black responds with pawn to a fur, fixing the queenside pawns and creating a permanent weakness in white's position on b3. A very strong move. And here we go again, pawn to f5 from white. Having been stopped on the queenside, white reopens the kingside battle, trying to create new threats. Black's bishop retreats to d6. It's still an excellent piece, continuing to blockade the d-pawn while also keeping an eye on the kingside. Rook to c6, white's rook infiltrates deep into black's position, putting immense pressure on the bishop and the entire back rank. The tension is rising. The bishop returns to c5, once again challenging the rook and re-establishing the blockade. A resilient defense from black. Here it comes, f6. This is a brilliant pawn sacrifice. White isn't trying to win material, they're trying to blast open the lines to the black king. This move dramatically changes the character of the game and introduces chaos. Black is forced to capture, pawn takes pawn on f6, but look what this does, it shatters the pawn shield in front of the black king. Suddenly, the king feels very vulnerable. White recaptures with the g-pawn. The g-file is now wide open and white's rooks are ready to pour in. This is getting incredibly dangerous for black. Black's knight jumps to bait, attacking the rook on c6 and trying to kick it out. Black is scrambling to defend against the coming storm. The rook simply sidesteps to c7. From here, it's still a monster, controlling the 7th rank and keeping black's king locked in a cage. Knight to a6 from black, desperately trying to create counterplay on the queen side, but white's attack on the king side is the main story here. And now the other rook joins the party, rook to e7. This is a classic rook lift, and white's rooks are now working together in perfect harmony. The pressure is immense. The black king has to run, moving to j8. It's trying to hide, but there are no safe squares left. And with all the attention on the king side, white pushes the passed pawn to d6. This pawn, which has been dormant for so long, suddenly becomes a massive threat. It's a dagger aimed at the heart of black's position. Black's rook moves to bait, trying to create some breathing room, but white's attack is relentless. There it is, pawn to d7. The pawn is just one square away from promotion. This forces black's pieces into a passive, defensive posture. The end feels near. The knight comes to c7, the only move to stop the pawn from queening immediately, but white has more tricks up their sleeve. Bishop to c6, a fantastic move. The bishop puts even more pressure on black's position and supports the d7 pawn. Every one of white's pieces is playing its part. Black's knight moves to Essex, trying to set up a blockade, but it might be too little, too late. And now the white king starts its march, king to Etwo. The king is coming to join the attack, an incredibly brave and decisive plan. Black tries a desperate counterattack with pawn to d3, check. This is a last-ditch effort to create chaos and distract white. But white is not afraid. King takes the pawn on d3. The king is now in the middle of the board, leading the charge. What a sight. Black's bishop moves to d4, trying to create threats, but white has a stunning reply. Oh my goodness, what a move! Rook takes the knight on Essex. This is a brilliant exchange sacrifice, and it is absolutely crushing. By giving up the rook for the knight, white removes the last key defender of the d7 pawn and completely shatters black's defensive coordination. A tactical masterpiece. Black has to recapture pawn takes rook, but now the f-file is open and the black king is completely exposed. It's all over. The white king continues its triumphant march. King takes bishop on d4. The king is an unstoppable attacking force. Black's king tries to get back into the game, moving to f7, but it's a hopeless situation. King to f5, the white king stands proudly in the center of the board, dominating everything. Black has no way to stop the threats. Black's rook moves to j8, a final, desperate attempt to create some kind of counterplay, but white's plan is simple and unstoppable. King to d6, the king gets even closer, supporting the d7 pawn and threatening the f6 pawn. Black is being squeezed from all sides. Rook to g4, black is trying to create threats against the white pawns, but it's a futile effort. And the final nail in the coffin, king to c7. The king attacks the rook, and after the rook moves, the d-pawn will promote to a queen. Black has seen enough, and Ivic resigns. A spectacular victory for Martinez Alcantara. What a game! We saw a masterful display of controlled aggression from white, capped off by that brilliant exchange sacrifice. From the early pawn storm to the king's heroic march, this was a tactical gem. Thanks for watching Chess Tactic today, and we'll see you next time.